please join me in welcoming Dr. Abernethy to the stage.
Thank you.
So we decided that for this session, instead of just another talk, we would have a fireside chat. So we're thinking about it as if we're in our living room and we're asking some questions. So I'm going to start by asking the first question. I would like to begin by asking you to share with the audience some key aspects of your background and the path that led you to join FDA.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me here. I'm honored to join you. I'm an oncologist by background, as you heard, and pretty much my North Star has always been the patient sitting in front of me in the clinic. And for a lot of that time, I was almost haunted by the fact that we couldn't accelerate the process of getting life-saving medical products into the hands of clinicians and patients. At the university where I worked, I ran a program focused on this idea that if we had a system of interoperable data and software, we could use that system to then accelerate clinical trials and also observational research in order to then also support a concept of a learning health system. And it was all going along pretty well. We were able to show that we could write papers faster and run clinical trials a bit faster, but we kept hitting a ceiling. And the ceiling was that in academia, we had clinicians and biostatisticians and others at the table, but it was often hard to bring the engineers and the people who were much more on the applied development side to the table. And so after a while, I decided, what if I go to the tech industry and try and motivate this story from the tech industry? So I literally jumped from my professor job to a small health tech startup in New York City, complete with hoodies and jeans and lots of hackathons, I'd like to say. And really learned what would it take to motivate venture capital and health tech to solve this problem. I served on several public company boards and also small private companies. And what I could see was indeed we could start to move things forward from the health tech and the engineering and the software side. And we could do so from the academic side. But if I looked at the story from a meta level, the FDA served as the place with the guideposts, told us this is the direction we should be going. This is what high quality work looks like. This is what good data looks like. And so ultimately, when it became time to make the next career move, I went to FDA to try and shepherd this journey.
That's really interesting, and I'm sure that resonates with many people in the audience. I mean, we have mostly engineers here, and it's interesting to see the connection from the medical side and the engineering side. So that's very interesting. Thank you. Our audience is also very interested in the developments surrounding artificial intelligence and how will they really impact FDA-regulated industries. Do you ever envision a connection between AI and FDA?
Yes, so let me back up for a second. You know, I got to FDA, my area of background is really data. Clinical data in particular, but also instrumentation data, claims data, and really how do you pull data together. And so when I was recruited to the agency, I think everybody expected, and certainly the news media expected, that this was now a data revolution for the agency. And I still hope to see that, and I'll come back to that, I hope. But what happened was when I got to the agency, I realized that in order to have a data revolution, we had to have an agency that was technically ready and had the technical vision to also participate in that data revolution. And so, practically speaking, took on the role of Chief Information Officer approximately March, April, really to try and lead that charge. Your question was about artificial intelligence.
Right.
And so, you know, I want to sort of reflect on this through the lens of being both CIO as well as Principal Deputy Commissioner. And as I think about artificial intelligence from the point of view of the agency, the framework that I use has 4 key components. The first is artificial intelligence-based solutions that we regulate. They're predominantly regulated through our device center right now. Office software is a medical device, and I can come back to that if you're interested. But practically speaking, where artificial intelligence is incorporated within the medical product as a way of actually the way that medical product does its work. The second is artificial intelligence-based solutions that aren't specifically regulated by the agency, but sit next to regulated work of the agency. In the landscape that I came from, this might be data curation solutions. It might be the incorporation of artificial intelligence to do better patient matching for clinical trials. It could be the role of artificial intelligence now to help to automate different aspects of clinical trial conduct, or also to support our understanding of automation and improvement across the work that happens, for example, in the food outbreak side of the business. The third place that I see artificial intelligence playing a very important role within the context of the work in the agency is, how does artificial intelligence help us within the agency do our work better? And it's important that we think about not just artificial intelligence solutions that we regulate or sit next to regulated industry, but also using artificial intelligence to automate what we do, because that does several things. It scales our book of work and allows us to be more efficient. It also teaches us what does good look like, so that in our regulated work, we also have a better perspective. The last part of the framework is, as I think about artificial intelligence with respect to what does the technical infrastructure need to look like inside the agency to essentially do computation at scale, as well as if a company is using artificial intelligence in their work, how do we provide good guidance as to what are appropriate controls and standards? As a last kind of comment around the artificial intelligence side, what I thought I'd do is give you two examples of where we're using AI right now. So one practical example is our PREDICT program. So PREDICT is our rules-based engine that we currently use to figure out which truck do we inspect. You can imagine that food is coming in across our border. Let's imagine we're now at a checkpoint between Mexico and the United States, and our inspectors have to figure out which truck to inspect. And they use a software solution called PREDICT, which is a rules engine. We've been doing this for 10 years, and the rules get written once a year. Now we've got 10 years of data of how good we are at picking which truck, and we can now use that information to train machine learning models to go from a rules engine to a machine learning engine, and also to cross-check, is the machine learning solution as good as or better than the rules-based solution? Not only then do we learn how to build machine learning solutions ourselves, but we also learn how to then deliver those at scale back to the inspector standing at the checkpoint. We learn about user interfaces and how to make sure that the end user understands the answer. And we also develop the cycle of data so we can continuously update the programs. We're doing the same thing now to automate, for example, safety reports and other aspects across the agency.
Okay, and as far as from the inspection side, is FDA, is part of the program looking at a similar program for drugs?
So the goal is to first start with solutions like PREDICT, where we've got long-standing data in rules-based engines, pressure test there, and then take lessons learned and move that across the agency. We have now I call it a community of practice. Within agency parlance, it's a working group. We have a trans-agency community of practice where different solutions that are being built across the agency are showcased and lessons learned shared. So for example, as we develop the solutions within the PREDICT model, we also have the team in CEDAR on the drug side watching to see how is this working and how can we learn. As the CIO, I also need to be thinking, okay, if we're going to build this on the food side, if we're going to build it on the drug side, if we're going to build it on the devices side, what does the central infrastructure need to look like in order to make sure that we can not only build these solutions, but then deploy them at scale in a very efficient manner and in a way that all of us can rely on?
Right, I think that leads into another question. So based on what you said, it seems that FDA is really looking at modernizing infrastructure and addressing different types of data. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So, as I mentioned when I was talking about coming to the CIO role, I really thought that data was going to be our core shtick. And as I looked at what we needed to do first, I realized that we need to have a stepwise path towards being able to use data more efficiently in an interoperable way as an agency. And the first part of that stepwise path is the Technology Modernization Action Plan, which was announced in mid-September. TMAP is intended to do three critical things. The first is to double down on making sure we have the right technical infrastructure in the agency to be ready for a landscape of data exchange in the future. That means that we have cloud-forward plans. We're making sure that the agency is ready for secure and confident data exchange, and that we have essentially changed the culture and the teams within the agency in a way that allows us to have a forward-looking technical build. The second part of the Technology Modernization Action Plan is focused on use cases, living examples that allow us to showcase what it looks like when we're a more modern and technology-forward agency, and also helps us envision what we need to build. And I'll come back to a couple examples of use cases in just a second. The third is something that we've really just not quite done yet as an agency, and that's that we need to learn how to communicate and collaborate with the greater community of data and technology stakeholders so we can figure out how to talk. We know how to talk to, for example, the pharmaceutical industry or the device industry, but we have no clear mechanism to talk to the data and tech industry, and therefore it's hard to provide even information on what's regulated versus not regulated. What's the direction of how to build solutions? What does high quality software development look like? So let me stop and go back to those use cases there for a second. And the purpose of use cases is really to both allow us to imagine what the world looks like and also say, here's what we need to build now and in the future. It's road mapping. And as I've been thinking about use cases, I've thought about them in 3 critical categories, and I'll give you some examples. So the first critical category are use cases that are already books of work happening at the agency or across biomedicine that we just need to add gas to. And an example there is 7 and 15-day safety reporting for INDs. CBER and CDER currently receive information from industry via MedWatch forms, right? PDFs come to us through a gateway. And boom, we get PDFs, and the medical reviewers are supposed to monitor these forms and spot check them. Practically speaking, one of our medical reviewers said, now wait a second, the information's coming out of databases, it's actually now being populated into a form, and then the form's coming to the agency. What if we hooked up the pipes and basically build an API, an application programming interface, to bring the data in as structured information directly into the agency? That was built as a minimal viable product, an MVP. That MVP, ultimately 5 industry partners indeed participated and said, yes, this looks good to us. We were able to transfer information efficiently from pharmaceutical sponsors to the agency. We were able to figure out one of the critical questions, where do we put the data? So we had to figure that out. We then ultimately hardened the environment to make sure that it was appropriately secure and that the software solution was fully scalable. But then you needed to do other things, like make sure that there were ways for medical reviewers to quickly review and visualize the safety data that was coming in, teach the medical reviewers, provide guidance to industry. And so that book of work went from an idea to a minimal viable product to full hardening, and then all of the bells and whistles that needed to go on. And I think you might be hearing more about this very, very soon. And so that's an example of a use case that tells the story of where we can go as we move from PDFs to now interoperable data that allows the agency to be more scalable and do our work more efficiently.
It's amazing. And for those of us, and I know I have some colleagues in the audience who started out in the industry a little bit over 35 years ago, we remember filling those out by hand. Okay, and and then when we could fax them in, it was like a big improvement. You could fax them. So this is amazing, and it really does help the patient population. So when you think about it, that is the aim. So that's wonderful. The last question that we want to explore is the area of real-world evidence and the future of personalized medicine. And I'm just going to stop and say, again, many people in the audience, when we started out in our career, personalized medicines, we didn't even know the term. So this is very interesting to many people here.
Yeah, so, again, as an oncologist, this is a landscape that I've kind of lived along quite a journey. And as a melanoma doctor, this was, directly embedded in my clinic. So real-world evidence, I'll start there and then kind of match that into what does this mean for personalized medicine. First of all, a little bit of definition. When I think about real-world evidence, this is essentially evidence that's generated outside of traditional clinical trials. It's basically based on real-world data. Real-world data may be prospective or retrospective. Oftentimes we're talking about information that's already collected as a byproduct of care, such as in electronic health records, claims data. It also could be information intentionally collected through, for example, registries. One of the things that is frequently discussed is real-world evidence randomized or not? Randomized pragmatic trials are indeed real-world evidence trials because typically they have very wide and generalizable eligibility criteria and often can include data points that are being collected directly in the electronic health record or outcomes that are coming through multiple sources. That's a little bit about definitions. I don't think there's anything about real-world evidence that's new. Mm-hmm. Practically speaking, this is, new age outcomes research. We've gone through the names of health services research, comparative effectiveness research. This is now real-world evidence. But what is different and new about RWE in 2019 and beyond is the fact that now through data and technology, we've got so many new evidence sources, especially information out of electronic health records. 21st Century Cures, which was passed in December of 2016, compelled the FDA to try and understand, could we use real-world evidence, and actually gave us 2 use cases to focus on. Supplemental indications, and also post-marketing commitments and requirements. And so essentially said, FDA, start to figure out the role of real-world evidence, use these 2 practical tasks as a way of sorting this out. You don't have to use this, but you need to sort out, can you do this, and also start to develop guidance. In December of 2018, FDA put out its framework from CDER for real-world evidence. Importantly, CDRH had a prior guidance around real-world evidence. And the CDER framework said we were going to do 3 things. So you can see a kind of continuous pattern here, right? Yeah. So the framework said, first, we need to understand the appropriate data for real-world evidence, fit for purpose. The second is we need to understand the appropriate analysis approach for real-world evidence, fit for purpose. And third, we need to understand what use cases, what evidentiary tasks can real-world evidence be put in place within the context of the book of work for which CDER is most focused. The kinds of real-world evidence tasks that are being looked at right now include pragmatic clinical trials, the ability to use real-world evidence for control arms, real-world evidence for secondary indications, and also trying to understand how do real-world evidence studies line up compared to traditional clinical trials. All of that is happening in order to then inform FDA's guidance within the context of real-world evidence. Where do I think this is going to go? Yeah. Some of you may know in the audience, real-world evidence has been sort of a key area of my focus for a long time. And I anticipate that there are going to be a number of real-world evidence tasks that are going to be straightforward. The role of real-world evidence to inform better design of traditional clinical trials, for sure. The role of real-world evidence to help us understand with confidence where patients are who can be enrolled in clinical studies. The role of real-world evidence to understand how patients perform for patients who were otherwise not likely to be enrolled in clinical trials, such as those who have kidney failure or liver failure. I think the areas of question that we all want to know more about are areas such as real-world evidence as a control arm for a clinical trial, or real-world evidence to replace clinical trials, and I think we've got a long way to go there. Finally, in the landscape of precision medicine, real-world evidence helps us understand what it looks like for the real patient who sits in front of us. So ultimately, it is more about precision medicine because it's more about the patient who's got the multiplicity of issues that typically show up in the clinic.
It's amazing. I mean, I think we could sit here for hours, and if we had the time, we'd open questions to the audience, but we can't. But I hope you can stay with us and talk to some of our colleagues, because the people in this audience are the ones that are developing, designing facilities, manufacturing, testing, controlling product, and are most interested in all this innovation. So thank you so much for joining us.
And thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you. Amazing.